Welcome to your deep dive. We're going deep on this text today. It's called Pasted Text, and it's got a wild take on the creation of the universe.
Yeah, definitely wild.
It's based on the Bhagavad Gita, but the interpretations are
They're not what you typically hear.
not what you typically hear at all.
It's certainly a different perspective.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, though.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
I guess for starters, just give us a quick overview of the source material we're working with.
Okay, yeah. So, like you said, it is based on the Bhagavad Gita, but
Yeah.
it's focusing on those verses that talk about the creation of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And the interpretations are definitely not mainstream Hindu understanding.
So for someone who's familiar with the Gita,
Yeah.
what are we going to see here that's different, that's going to surprise us?
Okay, well, like the big thing is that it presents this idea of a cosmic family with Brahm, also known as Kal, as the father figure, and then Prakriti or Durga as the mother.
Okay.
And their union, along with these fundamental forces called the gunas,
Okay.
they're like cosmic building blocks.
Interesting.
That brings about the birth of all souls.
So it's a divine origin story.
Exactly.
But with Brahma and Durga at the top.
Yeah, and then here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The text uses this analogy from the Bhagavad Gita itself, from chapter 15, about an upside-down tree.
An upside-down tree?
Yeah, have you heard of this before?
I have not.
Okay, well, it's pretty wild.
I'm ready.
So the roots at the top represent Purna Paramatma, the supreme god.
Okay.
The trunk is Akshar Brahm, also known as Parbrahm.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this big branch symbolizing Brahm, who they called Shar Purish.
Shar Purish.
Yeah, it means perishable.
Oh, okay.
And then get this, from that branch, you have 3 smaller branches representing Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Wait, so Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, they're not at the top, they're just branches.
The branches, exactly.
Okay, so that already is different from what most people think of.
Yes, it challenges the common understanding of them as the Supreme Trinity in Hinduism.
Okay.
And they really hammer this point home because they say that the Bhagavad Gita actually describes 3 types of gods.
Okay, 3 types of gods? This is really different.
Yeah, this is not your average Gita interpretation.
I'm all ears, lay it on me.
Okay, so you have the Shar Purish, or Brahm, who we said is perishable.
Right.
Then there's Ashar Purish, or Parbrahm, who's imperishable but not truly eternal.
Okay, so imperishable but not eternal.
Right. There's another level.
Okay, I'm sensing there's a bigger fish here.
Yes, there is, and that brings us to Param Akshar Purish.
Okay.
That's the supreme god in this interpretation.
So Paramakshar Purish is above Brahm in this upside-down tree.
They're saying that's the source of everything.
Okay.
The truly eternal being, and they identify Paramakshar Purish as Kabir.
Kabir.
Yeah.
Now, when I think of the Gita, I think of Krishna and Arjuna.
Of course.
Where does Kabir come into all of this?
Well, that's what's so intriguing about this interpretation. They're presenting this different perspective, elevating Kabir to this supreme position that you don't typically see in mainstream Hinduism.
It's like they're saying the traditional understanding of the Gita is missing this.
That's one way to look at it. And they go on to really emphasize that to truly understand this whole thing.
Okay.
You need to find a Tapdarshi saint.
A Tapdarshi saint.
An enlightened being who can fully explain this whole world tree situation and guide people towards liberation.
So it's like they're saying, don't just take our word for it. Find an expert who can show you the bigger picture.
That's it. That's the message.
Okay, this is really different than anything I've ever heard about the Gita before.
It definitely shakes things up.
Yeah.
It's like we're looking through this new lens and seeing the figures of Hindu mythology in a whole new light.
So speaking of seeing things in a new light, they included some FAQs with this text.
They did.
Maybe we should look at some of those and see if that helps us understand a little bit better.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what questions people have about this.
Okay, so the first question is, who is attributed with delivering the knowledge of the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita?
Okay, so according to this interpretation, the Gita itself states in chapters 11 and 8 that the knowledge came from Brahm. Remember, that's Kal, who entered the body of Krishna to narrate it.
So Krishna's not speaking. It's Brahm speaking through him.
That's their interpretation, yeah.
Okay, so that changes things.
It definitely adds a layer of complexity there.
Yeah.
It's suggesting that even Krishna, this revered figure, is part of this larger cosmic hierarchy.
Okay, here's another question. According to the Gita, how are souls entrapped in this world?
Okay, so they point to chapter 14 of the Gita, which talks about the 3 gunas. Remember those cosmic building blocks?
Yeah.
They're saying those gunas are what bind souls to the cycle of birth and death.
Okay.
Influencing their actions and keeping them stuck.
So those gunas are keeping us in this earthly realm.
That's a good way to put it.
And stopping us from getting to that higher level with Kabir.
Yeah, and they're saying that to break free from that cycle, you need to transcend the influence of those gunas.
And that's where the Tapdarshi saint comes in.
That's what they would say, yes.
They're the guide to get past those gunas.
Exactly. They're the ones who can help you understand those forces.
Okay.
And how to break free.
Okay, here's another one. Who is considered an enlightened saint, according to the Gita?
Okay, well, they dive into chapter 15 again, saying that an enlightened saint, or what they call a Tapdarshi set, is someone who can explain that upside-down world tree analogy perfectly.
So you have to understand that to be an enlightened saint.
That seems to be the criteria, yeah.
Not just be a good person.
No, it's about having that specific insight.
To that cosmic structure.
Yeah, like they've got the key to unlock those secrets.
Okay, this is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about Hinduism and the Gita.
I know, it's kind of blowing my mind, too.
It's like this whole other side.
It is. It's like discovering this hidden dimension to this familiar story.
Okay, what else they got in these FAQs?
Let's see. This one's interesting. What is the significance of the upside-down hanging tree in the Bhagavad Gita?
That tree's been in my head since you first mentioned it.
I know, it's pretty wild imagery.
So what's the deal with it?
Well, they say that tree symbolizes the origin of the world, how everything is connected.
Okay.
And they even quote a verse from Kabir himself.
Kabir himself?
Yeah, which describes this tree. Akshar Purush is a single tree, Niranjan dwells in it. The three gods are its branches, the world is its leaves.
Okay, so break that down for me.
Okay, so in this context, Niranjan is another name for Brahm.
Okay.
So they're saying Brahm resides within this tree,
right,
with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva as the branches, and all of us, the world, as the leaves.
So this cosmic family tree, but upside down.
Yeah, it's a different visual than the typical Hindu understanding.
Definitely.
But it's a very striking one.
And then with Kabir as the source.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, what's the next question?
Which main gods are described in the Gita?
Well, we kind of already talked about that, right?
We did touch on it. Yeah, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva.
Yeah.
But remember, this text argues that the Gita actually describes 3 types of gods.
Right.
Not just those specific deities.
Okay.
So we have Shar Purish, the perishable god, which they identify as Brahm. Then there's Akshar Purish, who is imperishable but not eternally so, which they say is Parbrahm.
Right.
And then, of course, the ultimate, the Param Akshar Purish, the supreme god whom they identify as Kabir.
So even though they're taking all of this from the Gita, they're interpreting it to mean that Kabir is the supreme being.
That's their main argument.
Yeah, okay, I'm seeing the pattern.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Okay. How is nature created according to the Bhagavad Gita?
So this is where mom and dad come back in
You got it.
Brahma Durga.
They're referring to chapter 14 of the Gita, which talks about the creation of the 21 universes of Brahm.
Oh, wow.
They say that Prakriti, or Duska, is the womb of all beings.
Okay.
And Brahm impregnates her with the seed that leads to the birth of all life.
So they're really sticking with that family metaphor.
Yeah.
That's the consistent thing here.
The consistent thread
throughout
this whole interpretation.
All right, next question.
Okay, this one goes back to our discussion earlier. The knowledge giver of the Bhagavad Gita is in the shelter of which god?
Oh, okay, so Brahma is speaking through Krishna, but who's above him?
That's the question, right? So according to this interpretation, chapter 15 of the Gita states that Brahm himself, the knowledge giver, is actually under the shelter of a higher power.
Whoa.
They're saying that even he acknowledges the existence of this supreme god.
So even Brahm is saying, there's somebody bigger than me.
That's the implication.
Wow.
And they emphasize that finding a Tapdarshi saint will lead you to that supreme god's eternal abode where the cycle of birth and death ends.
Wow. Okay, so this is a lot to process.
It is.
I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
What's the last question?
This one ties everything together nicely. Which god nurtures and protects everyone in the 3 realms?
All right, so who's the ultimate protector?
Well, they refer to chapter 15 of the Gita again.
Okay.
And they say that while other gods are mentioned, the one who truly nurtures and sustains all beings in all 3 realms is Param Akshar Brahm.
Kabir.
And according to chapter 8, that's Kabir.
Okay, so this is like a whole other view of Hinduism.
It's a very different perspective
than what most people think of.
Yeah, it's definitely unique.
And even controversial.
For sure.
I mean, it's really making me rethink the whole thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and we've covered so much already, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We're just getting started.
Of this whole cosmic family tree.
There's so much more to unpack.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to, like, the implications of this interpretation.
Right.
And how it challenges our view of the Gita and Hinduism as a whole.
I can't wait to dive deeper.
Let's do it.
But for now, we'll have to take a break. Stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we'll continue to unravel the mysteries of this fascinating interpretation. Welcome back to the deep dive. I don't know about you, but after that first part, I'm seeing the Bhagavad Gita in a whole new light.
Me too. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's like someone took those familiar stories and shook them up.
Right, like a snow globe.
Yeah, exactly. And this interpretation with the cosmic family tree and the emphasis on Kabir,
right,
it's a real head-scratcher. It's like they're using the Gita itself to back up their claims.
It's a clever strategy, using the verses to say, look, the answers were here all along.
Yeah, it's like one of those hidden in plain sight puzzles.
Exactly.
Where you think you know what you're looking at, and then suddenly a whole new picture emerges.
It's an invitation to look deeper and be open to the possibility of different truths.
Yeah, okay, so if we're going with this idea that Kabir is the supreme god, where does that leave the other deities, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva?
Right, well, that's a great question, and this text tackles it head-on with that upside-down tree analogy. Remember, it's not just a visual, it's a hierarchy.
Right, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, they're all branches stemming from something bigger.
Exactly, and the text even says that those gods, they're not truly eternal.
Wait, even Brahm, he's like the creator god.
Yeah, I know, it's a big departure from the traditional understanding.
So they're saying he's not eternal.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but yes, in this interpretation, they're saying even Brahm is subject to change. He's powerful, but not the ultimate source.
So those major deities, they're not the be-all, end-all, are they?
It's not about diminishing their power, but more about reframing it, that their power flows from a higher source, Kabir.
Okay, so it's like they're channels for his energy.
I like that analogy. It highlights that power comes from a single source.
It's making me think about how we see power and divinity.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the familiar stories.
You know, it reminds me of that whole thing about finding a Tapdarshi saint.
Right.
They're really emphasizing having a guide.
It's like you're venturing into uncharted territory. You'd want an experienced explorer to guide you.
So this Tapdarshi saint is like the experienced explorer.
Yes, they've seen the truth and can help others find their way.
Okay, so if someone's listening and thinking, wow, this Kabir thing is blowing my mind, I want to learn more.
Yeah.
How do you find a Tapdarshi saint?
Well, that's the age-old question, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't just Google it.
I wish it were that easy, but the text suggests it's more about inner seeking and intuition.
So cultivating an inner awareness, a receptivity to guidance.
Exactly. It's about that thirst for knowledge and then recognizing the signs.
It's like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yes, there's an element of artiness.
It's like tuning a radio to the right frequency.
I love that analogy.
So even though this interpretation is challenging traditional beliefs, it's still rooted in the Gita.
It is. They're not dismissing the text, just looking at it from a different angle.
Yeah, it's like the Gita is a gem with many facets.
I like that. And this interpretation is just one of those facets shining in a new way.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to that diversity. It's like exploring a hidden garden.
What a beautiful garden it is.
I feel like I need to reread the Gita with fresh eyes.
Me too.
But I think we have time for one more thought before we wrap up this part.
Definitely.
What's standing out to you the most?
Well, for me, it's the reminder that spiritual exploration is ongoing. There's always more to learn and uncover.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And that's a perfect note to end on, but don't go too far, because in the final part, we'll continue our exploration and see what other insights we can find. Welcome back to our deep dive. It feels like we've gone through a wormhole or something.
It does, right.
With this whole new interpretation of the Gita.
Yeah.
And that idea of Kabir as the supreme god.
Right.
That's really sticking with me.
It's definitely a departure from the traditional view.
It is, and it makes me wonder, where did that emphasis on Kabir come from?
Yeah.
Was it always there, or did it develop over time?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And this particular text doesn't really go into the historical context too much,
Okay.
but it does highlight that spiritual traditions aren't static.
Right, they evolve.
Exactly. They change and adapt based on so many factors.
So this interpretation with Kabir could be one of those adaptations.
Exactly, like a new lens to view the Gita through.
And it probably has its own lineage of teachers and practitioners.
Most likely each one adding their own understanding.
Which brings us back to the Tapdarshi saint.
Mm-hmm.
If they're the key to understanding all of this,
Right.
how do you even find one?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that one.
No, you can't just Google it.
Nope, but like we touched on earlier, the text suggests it's about inner seeking and intuition.
So it's more about being open and receptive.
Yeah, cultivating that thirst for knowledge and recognizing the signs.
It's like that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Exactly.
You have to be ready.
There has to be that resonance.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that this idea of finding a spiritual teacher is still so relevant.
I agree. It speaks to a deep human need for connection and guidance.
And you know what's really interesting is that even though this interpretation challenges traditional Hindu beliefs,
Yeah.
it's still rooted in the Gita.
Absolutely. They're reinterpreting it, not rejecting it.
It highlights the idea that these spiritual texts can have so many layers of meaning.
It's like the Gita is this vast river with different currents flowing within it.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks.
So many ways to understand it.
And that's what makes exploring these different interpretations so valuable.
It broadens our perspective and makes us question our assumptions.
Exactly. It's like we've been given a new set of lenses.
A new way of seeing.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of learning, isn't it?
It makes us think about things in new ways.
I'm curious about how this interpretation plays out in the lives of those who follow it.
Me too. Like, how does it shape their worldview and their daily practices?
That would be fascinating to explore.
It would. Yeah. It's like we've gotten a glimpse into a whole other world.
A different way of understanding reality.
And now it's up to us to decide where we go from here.
This deep dive has been about more than just the creation of the universe.
It has.
It's been about spiritual inquiry itself.
That's true. The process of questioning and exploring.
And recognizing that there's always more to learn.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say hold on to that curiosity and open-mindedness. We've seen how engaging with different perspectives can really expand our understanding.
Well said. And remember, this was just one interpretation of a very complex tradition. There's a whole world of thought and discussion out there, just waiting to be discovered.
So stay curious, keep those questions flowing, and never stop seeking.
And until next time, keep diving deep.